And we are live. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this meetup. If you already joined, then feel free to say hi. Hey, Kaspar. Feel free to say hi in the chat. Maybe include your location so that we can see where you're from, to see how international the crowd is today. If you do so, make sure that you select to all participants before sharing your message in the chat. Otherwise, only Kaspar and I will be able to see this. Great. Hello to Israel, Belgium, Wim, nice, welcome. We'll give this a few more minutes. We're currently at 40 participants. We'll give this a few more minutes to allow people to join. Florida, Munich, London. I see very different time zones. So good evening to some of you. Probably good morning to some others. London, Milan, Heidelberg, nice. Welcome everybody. Great to have you here. Maybe before we start, a few housekeeping rules. So this meeting is being recorded, as you can see, and we'll share the recording with you tomorrow in an email together with some useful links. We will also share again the link to download the full benchmark because Kaspar, I think you won't be able to go through everything today, but if you want to read through this, you're obviously very welcome to do so. If you have questions, then either use the chat that you already found. If you do so, and most of you already did, make sure that you select to everyone before asking a question. Or use the Q&A section. Maybe even better because your question won't get lost there. So we have a Q&A section. Feel free to use that one for questions. I think that's already it. I think 3 minutes in, I would be ready to start. Kaspar, are you ready?
I am totally ready. I could be more ready. Absolutely.
Good.
Good to see you, Christoph.
Yeah, same here. So welcome again, everybody. I'm Christoph. I'm your host tonight. I'm here to collect your questions and make sure that we get them to Kaspar. And yes, there will be a recording available. Just to answer the first question here in the Q&A section, really nice. Great to have you here, Kaspar, to guide us through the DevOps benchmarking that you did last year and also this year, I understood. So really looking forward to listen to your learnings and to your view on the industry. I think DevOps is a super interesting topic. So really excited to have you go through this. I hope for a lot of questions. That's what these meetups live from. So don't be shy. If you have a question, I'm sure, Kaspar, you will be happy to answer that. And with that, yeah, let me hand over to you. You can introduce yourself, I guess. And then we'd be also ready for you to share your screen.
Amazing. Let's do that. So welcome, everybody. I'm in a very good mood because today is the birthday of my little son. And that is the reason
happy birthday. How old is he?
It's just 2 years.
2 years. Wow, cool.
It's the only reason in the year I'm wearing a shirt. So a very special reason. And it's obviously also for you. But yeah, delighted to be here. I'm very much looking forward to this. This is a topic that's super dear to my heart. I haven't been talking in one of these sessions for a while. So it's great to see how many of you are joining and all of this interest from around the world. That's really humbling. Thank you so much. I think the data, the learnings that we found here are so interesting, so thrilling. So I think that's really something that is worth spending some time with. I just want to encourage you to ask questions. Like Christoph already said that, but I want to make sure that I echo this. If there's anything that you have while I'm speaking, just say so, and we'll have some Q&A sessions afterwards. So let me actually start this here. Maybe really quickly on me. I'm Kaspar. That's pretty much it. And I'm just really passionate about self-service, developer self-service, DevOps in general, all things platforms. I've been doing this for quite a while. I see some familiar faces. Holger Koch, quick shout out to you. You've been one of those people that have been with us for a very long time. We're doing a lot of community work. It's just, yeah, I've been passionate about this for the last 10 years, and we're working on platformengineering.org, internaldeveloperplatform.org, the platform Slack, and it's so amazing to see these communities grow. All right, what do I want to talk about today? Well, that's for first of all, what is self-service? How do we, because that is basically let me actually see with my speakers work well here. Yeah, perfect. So because this is actually what it's about, the core of everything, and we'll get to this, why this is the case. We are then going to talk about when to invest into the right things. Because I mean, I always think that it's so great to see all of this data, but the data itself is pretty useless if we can't derive good next steps, if you want. And then I want to take you on a journey to build a little car together, which sounds very random, but it will be less random at the end of this talk, I hope at least. Otherwise, tell me. All right, so we surveyed a lot of teams, and we continue to survey a lot of teams, and we do that across different platforms, and we do that all of the time. In this case, we talk about DevOps. We also will survey on, I think, Kubernetes and infrastructure as code, lots of different things. And so in this particular survey, I think one of the most interesting data that we've collected so far, we've surveyed 856 teams across primarily Europe and the United States. And what we did is that we asked a lot of questions. People were very kind in answering tons of things. And we then actually clustered them and gave them like scores. Like you could get a certain benchmark. How good are you doing at DevOps if you want? That's a little bit subjective, but a lot of the things are very straightforward. Like it's probably better that you have a higher deployment frequency than having a lower frequency. So the more we look at this, the more it makes sense if you want. And then we have, we actually took those, and what we did here is then we actually plotted this across the different buckets and groups. And what you're seeing here in the red zone, if you want, is what I'm referring to as the DevOps mountain of tiers. Let me look at a little bit more at the clustering. We clustered into 4 different buckets. We have the top performer bucket with a score of over 90, high performers 70 to 89, mid performers 40 to 69, and low performers with a score between 0 and 39. And the thing that you're seeing here in the middle, this bump, is what I call the DevOps mountain of tiers. And what does it tell us? A little bit pathetic, but what it tells us is that there are a lot of teams across the world stuck in between. Like they decided we'll go all in on this and we will do DevOps, but they are not really able to yield the results. And this is actually where we can learn. Where we can learn how we can help these teams across this, crossing this mountain, if you want, and we can compare ourselves, if you want, to these teams. I've not found it super productive to compare myself to Netflix, because the reality of at least most of the engineering teams that I've personally worked with is that they didn't have the funding. They probably didn't have the management backing for a lot of these things. And so I found it so interesting to look at how other teams in this realm are doing. What I want to do now is that I actually want to walk you through the results, but I'll do this fairly high level. Why? Because I could walk you through lines and lines of data and show you like the last little bit of monoliths versus microservices. But first of all, this data is available. We'll show all of the results with you. I want to summarize this, and then I actually want to derive tangible learnings that you can take away and then actually improve stuff. That is probably the reason we're all here tonight. Right, so we looked at 3 things. We looked at the architecture, we looked at the KPI and metrics for the clustering, and then we looked at the cultural elements. And let's start with the architecture first. And if I talk about architecture, I'm talking about how do people build their tool chain? How do they construct their architecture? Do they more lean towards microservice architectures, distributed systems? or are those rather monoliths? Do they prefer containerization? Do they prefer Kubernetes? So, and with all of these data points, I'm always very critically asking myself, can we actually learn something from it? Does it tell us anything? My honest take is, it doesn't tell us very much. Architecture, long story short, doesn't tell us much. I mean, all of the things that you would expect are there. Like, high performers have a significantly higher likelihood of being containerized, fully containerized, although we can clearly see that almost everybody is on the journey. There's a couple of mainframe setups left, but containerization is the new legacy, if you want. Then the question, for instance, microservices versus monolith. This is highly subjective. You can't say a team is better because they're not operating on monolith. That is not a very clever thing to say, because there are tons of reasons why something is monolith. It has legacy reasons. There are some very valid reasons why you would run a monolith and not go all in on microservices. It is hugely subjective what a microservice actually is. I've seen a lot of different interpretations of that term. And so I think we would have to be very, very careful if we compare ourselves to others, whether these very flaky bits of data can tell us much. The same holds true for the tool chain. I have seen catastrophic setups on Kubernetes. Does it tell us that you're great if you're operating Kubernetes? No, definitely not. It holds true for the pipeline. I mean, it's definitely better if you have a highly automated CI/CD landscape that allows for continuous integration, continuous delivery, and all of these beautiful things. But again, if you're if you are in a regulated environment, you're working in a bank, you have more security intersections. Well, then that's just not possible. Okay, we probably get where I'm coming from. Now, that doesn't mean that there aren't interesting things in there. So I think it is just vastly interesting to see how Kubernetes is taking over. I think we're at 80% of respondents saying that Kubernetes is the target infrastructure or the target orchestrator that they're moving towards. I think there's definitely something to be taken serious here. But again, for our general learning, it doesn't mean that you go to Kubernetes and the world is great again. I think the opposite is very often true. Now, is there a question?
Yeah, there's two questions that may be good for to answer right now. So could you share a bit more about the organization surveyed? Like what size, what team size? Are these technology companies selling software, or does their software dev support the core product service of business?
Great question. So these are complete out of all areas. The vertical software as a service actually makes a fraction of the data points. I think it's below 10%, but we have a data appendix on this, so you can look at this in detail. The majority of these teams are between 250 and 1,000 developers, if I'm not mistaken. So we're talking about upper mid-market to enterprise. So fairly sufficient team sizes of engineering organizations.
Yeah, and then we have a second question, which I find really interesting. What about the microservice monolith? Isn't that the most commonly found situation, having lots of services that behave like a monolith? Just being fully containerized doesn't mean that this is built around a sound design and architecture.
That is exactly the point. So that's what we're seeing over and over again. We have this huge monolith. Let's just stuff it into a container and try to forget it, and then we'll just ramp up RabbitMQ super fast. So yeah, this doesn't mean anything. Like these things of what people tell you what they're using is just nonsense. Like it's not taking us anywhere. Trying to learn how to get better by just looking at this. Yeah, excellent question. So if we take a look at the next one, metrics, that is deployment frequency, change failure rates. To be honest, there are a couple of really dramatic things that there are like a high degree of enterprise respondents saying we regularly have change failure rates of 14%, and then it takes us up to a week to get this running again. I'm trying to imagine how that looks in practice, but overall, again, same things hold true. like significantly larger deployment frequency. We've seen that across all of the different surveys, change failure rate lower, all of these things. Again, what does that tell us? We can't, or I've seen people telling their teams, please deploy faster. The only thing that happens in that case is that the change failure rate goes up, because that you have to sacrifice testing. You can't prescribe teams to work faster. That's just not working. Like, it's one of these things that like consultants would say from the outside, if they have no idea about how engineering organizations work, but it doesn't really take us anyway to take this approach. Again, I believe that looking at metrics, comparing ourselves to metrics isn't yielding any results. Have a look at them yourself. I don't think that's super interesting. Okay, so now I'm sitting here for 10 minutes. I'm telling you stuff that you shouldn't do. Let's actually dive into what I believe actually is valuable to look at in more detail, and that is culture. And that is something that if somebody would say that in an inspirational post on LinkedIn, I would be bored. But from all the data that we can see and observe, that is actually what's making the difference. But there are a lot of subtle differences, and we can actually say a lot about them. So let's have a look at this. One of the most interesting things that we asked, and we asked this from several different perspectives, is how teams do DevOps tasks in an organization. So that means things like you need to change configurations, you need to deploy to production, you need a new database, whatever, any of these things. And let's look at the, like, first of all, let's look at the, across the entire, all of the data points. And we have 21.2% of respondents saying that they have dedicated operations teams that take care of DevOps tasks. App developers are strictly separated and don't care much about configurations and infrastructure. 21.2%, that is the classical model that we would probably see pre-DevOps, where you have like sysadmins in the old world doing stuff for other developers. Then we have 44.6% of respondents that say you build it, you run it is what we are breathing. All developers can do all of the DevOps tasks on their own. Okay, so far so good. Then we have 34.2% that are saying some developers can do some DevOps tasks on their own and are constantly busy helping less experienced developers. Well, this actually tells us something. The 34.2%, this is the interesting bit, because the 21.2%, they've just said, like, we're basically not doing this. We are going to transition to this. But the question is, how are they now transitioning? And what if I'm seeing this done wrong in an organization, then they end in the 34.2% bucket. That's the bucket of somebody says developers are now doing everything, and they're shifting the operational overhead into the edges, if you want. And they say, well, we don't want to centralize this. We are now DevOps. It's just one of these things that organizations just proclaim after a management meeting. And then, like, all of a sudden, these teams are doing everything themselves. And let's like go ahead and actually dissect what this means. What this means is that, and I've seen this over and over again, the more senior developers in these teams take over the job of dealing with Helm charts, dealing with configurations, doing all of this overhead. And the more junior developers are just going to these senior people in their team and letting them do the DevOps tasks. That's a pattern that I'm seeing over and over and over again. So what have you actually done? You've created what I refer to as shadow operations. You took the responsibility from the central teams and you pushed that, like you shifted that left in the worst possible way. You just let the engineering teams do this. And you can, if you do this step, like measure frequency, measure productivity. And I can tell you from all of the observations and all of the measurements that we've done, you will see a drop between 15 to 25% in productivity, because all of a sudden these teams have to allocate resources to actually trying to get all of the operational tasks done. And that means you have no effects of scale, all the negatives, all of the positives. DevOps isn't something you can just shout out and then it happens. You have to be very careful and do it the right way. Now, let's actually take exactly the same question, and we are looking at the low performers. So in this case, 52.9% of people have dedicated operations people, and they just do strict separation of concerns. You don't deal with stuff, and that's it, period. In 44% of cases, the developers can do some DevOps tasks on their own and are constantly busy helping less experienced developers. That's the shadow operations bit that I was referring to. And only 3.1% of cases, we have true you build it, you run it. And now the thing that I find so fascinating about this data point. If you look at the high performing bucket, you just get a beautiful plain blue dot, and everybody, 10 out of 10 teams are following a true you build it, you run it model. Okay, what does that mean? What does you build it, you run it mean? Why should that be different to just pushing this out into the edges and letting developers do operations? So why did these teams actually reach you build it, you run it, rather than being stuck in the shadow operations side of things, the shadow operations darkness, if you want? We can learn a lot from these findings. And I think what we can learn is that you build it, you run it, reaching a true you build it, you run it means developers in your team can deal with the cognitive load of your setup. Cognitive load, what does that mean? Cognitive load doesn't mean somebody is stupid if they cannot deal with Terraform. It doesn't mean that at all. All of the people you work with, that is the usual assumption, are very clever. And if they would sit and concentrate on Terraform for a while, they would be very good at Terraform. That's like just a prerequisite. But the thing is, we're all under extreme pressure. And like chances are that most of the colleagues want to be the best in TypeScript. And so cognitive load means, can I actually allocate some of my cognitive capacity to digesting very complex systems? A good you build it, you run it system means you're aligning the complexity of the system with the cognitive load. And I'm thinking about this more on a model perspective. If we take complexity of a setup on the one axis, and we look at the cognitive load on the second axis, and then we just draw a line, then you can see that there are some tasks in our setup, rollback configurations, that's probably low cognitive load, low complexity. And then there are other things like, let's say, VPC networking that are high complexity, high cognitive load. The trick is, and this is what you have to get right, and this is what we're observing in all of the high-performing teams, they're not better, they don't have more time, they don't even have more funding in their organizations. They just do a better job in understanding the team's preference for cognitive load, and they are then matching this with the complexity level, and wherever it's exceeding the complexity level, they abstract things away in the right way. That's the next but, right? You can't abstract things, it's very dangerous. You have to abstract in the right way, do that very responsibly, and everything else on the left-hand side is operated by developers. So again, good teams have separations of concerns. There's nothing wrong with that. They have abstractions. I've worked with some of the best engineering organizations in the world, of very, very well-known brands. It's just not the case that everybody operates everything. They are operating a certain setup, and then the rest is actually taken care for them, but they're never actually abstracted and hidden away from anything. All right. So again, great teams understand how much complexity developers want to deal with. And then they build what I refer to as transparent abstractions or golden paths accordingly. And I think there is another thing that we're getting wrong. I'm just working on an article that I'm really looking forward to. It's called The 10 Fallacies in Platform Engineering. And one of the fallacies is the loudest voice fallacy. A lot of DevOps setups are built for the Linux kernel hacker. What do I mean by that? This is a little, over the top, but I'm observing that there is in every engineering team always this person that is super in the nitty-gritties, has done it for years, wants to do everything themselves. Like she's probably perfect at like all of the different things because diving into that's what she wants to pursue. And these people are very articulate. They're very self-confident if it comes to demanding how the setup looks. They're probably much more confident than the junior developer who's doing React.js. Well, the problem is everybody in the engineering team has to operate the setup, right? There is no way around, which means that if you, and this is what's often happened, optimizing DevOps setup, not for the weakest link, but for the loudest voice, that is actually something that isn't super productive. Okay, so how do you strike the balance? How do you get to a setup that balances the cognitive load that people want with the level of abstraction that they feel comfortable with? And there are four rules of thumb. First of all, that sounds again like LinkedIn. I'm selling personal branding, but it's over communicate. That sounds so simple and is so hard. So one of the people that I was really inspired by is Nigel Simpson. Did I get the name right, Christoph, this time? Yeah, and so I just always use the term. So Nigel was the director of enterprise technology with a large media company and thousands of developers. And like he took this really interesting approach of regularly doing hackathons and like meetings, dojos where they would meet. And one of the things that they would talk in every meeting is, what's the right level of cognitive of context? What's the right level of cognitive load? How do we balance these things? What do you feel comfortable with? And what he would do is he wouldn't bring everybody together, but he would actually split this up. And he would talk to the juniors, and he would talk to the kernel hackers, and he would be very careful in curating the setup. A lot of these things, when you're developing a product, and Manuel Pais says that brilliantly in his team topology books that I highly recommend if you've not read it, is that you have to treat, he's talking about platforms, but you have to treat DevOps setups if you want. You have to treat DevOps like a product, and you have to be sure to get the right feedback and to digest the feedback in the right way and always strike this very sensible balance. Number two, golden paths over golden cages. That means do not abstract people away. Do not force them to do something, but nudge them to do something. Give them certain guarantees if they stay on the golden path. I'm going to tell you the story of my friend Jason over at GitHub in a second, and you'll get a better idea. If you want to shift this, if you want to have developers deal with higher complexity setups, you can do that, but you can only do that if you're ready to invest and to educate and to empower. They're all intelligent. You can just spend a month during which they will not actually output any code and invest into them. And that means you're shifting the curve to the right. And fourth, transition from operations teams to platform teams. And that is one of the things that I'm most passionate about. So I want to deep dive on this a little more. This is GitHub Jason, and GitHub Jason was a senior vice president of engineering at Heroku. Heroku is this platform as a service, which you can use without any information of the underlying infrastructure. And GitHub Jason went over from Heroku to GitHub, became their CTO in 2017, and said, well, we have this operations silo and we have developed, we need to change this. So it would be so great to have a Heroku, right? And he started to build a platform, an internal developer platform on top of, I think it was data centers in AWS back then. Because what he was saying is that if you run a setup where dev and ops talk to each other, you probably don't have a great setup. And if you say the sentence, like a lot of people would say, whoa, does that mean people shouldn't talk to each other? No, definitely not, right? Conversations, super important. But you shouldn't have transactional conversations. There shouldn't be conversations around, I need a new database. I need to see the logs. I need to roll back. This should be end-to-end self-service. Let me tie things together. It should be, you build it, you run it across the entire stack. But these abstractions, these platforms that Jason would build, the Heroku-like experience, would actually act as the golden paths. They would act as the self-service layer on top, as the transparent abstraction. And GitHub JSON would give his developers certain guarantees if they would be staying on the path. And this is the key. This is what all of these elite companies and all of these high performers do. They build intelligent, transparent abstractions on top. What does that mean? Well, it means don't leave people alone with the complexity, build paved roads, glue stuff together, build platforms, treat platforms as products, and give people like roads that they can use that act as guarantees and actually route them through with low cognitive load.
We have a good question here from Amir. He was asking, so developers somehow self-serve changes to the environment design?
Yes. So in a good setup, like in a team at GitHub, there is no conversation between developers and operations. They should, from the start of an application to the operations of an application, to the spinning up of environments, to the operational bit, you should be trying at least to provide as much defaults as possible. And I think that is also counting directly into the next point, you should standardize. This is one of the things that I see a lot of these great teams get very well. If you just let things free float, and especially if you push the responsibility from the central operations teams into the different working groups, where then the senior developers establish this shadow operations function, then what happens is that you get this insane strauss of different approaches. So in lots of teams, you can see 120 flavors of Postgres is a good example. And that is because now every single team spins something up their way and always says, yeah, we're a very special snowflake and we have these very special things and our Terraform file looks this way and our Helm charts look this way. Because of my jobs, I'm looking at a tremendous amount of Helm charts, which sounds very boring, was actually really, really interesting because you can see that every time they say we're very, very special, you look at the Helm charts and you know exactly what they want. Like they want to have this service tied up to all of these dependencies and this DNS setting and those environment variables and the secrets manager, whatever. They all want something that dozens of other teams want as well. And then they write these charts and they say they're very special, but then really, if you look at them, they're 99.5% the same. And so standardization also means, especially standardization on the infrastructure level, is take all of that complexity, take all of these things away and say, if you want to have a Postgres, we don't have 120 different flavors. We maybe have 5 or 10. And if you use these 10, then you can use the 11th, like you can build the 11th. That's what I mean by transparent abstraction. If you really want to do it yourself, good God, just go ahead and do it. But if you're using one that are in of the 10, right, you're not on call, you're not on pager duty. You don't need to wait for security because security has actually checked those already. You just get the guarantees and life is good. And this has a tremendous impact on the overall productivity of these setups. So standardization is such a vital element. Glue stuff into paths, give guarantees, think about it as a platform, standardize and reduce the complexity, and think about what's the overall complexity that you actually really need to meet your application setup.
And we have a good follow-up question on that, again from Amir. So sorry to nudge about this point, but there's a difference between self-serve consuming of standardized environment designs versus designing them. Who should design or modify environment definitions? And how does this get integrated into a workflow?
Okay, yeah, great question. So on that level, what we're now seeing surface more and more are platform teams, or you can also call them operations teams, whatever, that rather than reacting to stuff, and reacting to stuff means you're filing a ticket in Jira, or you're sending them a message in Microsoft Teams, I need this and that, rather than this reaction. They come to a point where they standardize. So they give you default configurations. You need a new environment. That's the subset you can call to actually get this up and running. You need a certain, you want to stay on the path, and you need a Google Cloud SQL. Right. We will not only, you do a CLI command, my CLI create resource Postgres standard type 4. And we will not only execute a Terraform file in the background to stand this up, we will also launch a sidecar proxy, which this needs, and then we'll inject the environments through standard secrets into the running container. This is what I mean by that. And those would be usually designed by, that's what I'm seeing in most of these organizations, platform teams. What that means in the end, whether you have one platform team for 3,000-4,000 developers, or you have one for every team of 4, that differs. But you're designing functions whose job is not the cultural transformation. The job is not responding to certain situations, but the need is to proactively design flows that then help the overall self-service setup and lead to standardization by design. And you do that by providing these golden paths.
And Holger Koch is asking, how do we circumvent that developers don't like developer platforms as they limit their flexibility?
That is exactly it. That's what I mean by transparent abstractions. We've been all there. If we hear this about abstractions, we think of rigid OpenShift setups in 2010 that are just like encapsulating, and that don't give us the freedom, and they work in 95% of cases, but then in 5% of cases they fail, and then we are waiting for these people all the time. That's what I mean. Don't lock these things down. Give them the chance to develop the 11th method themselves. But when that happens, take guarantees away. Like, you have to create a pull factor. You cannot create a push factor. And so that's why these systems have to be circumventable, if this is an English word, at any point in time. There is a design change now. We are thinking of a lot of these platforms like the platforms of 2010. And like, one of the design design shifts is that we now have this significant amount of different components that we can build from. So we can, like, there are marketplaces out there. I just want to think of a Terraform registry, TerraGrant, even CloudFormation is better than it was. Like, we're building these drivers. You have Crossplane, we have Pulumi. There are so many things that help people navigate this or circumvent the golden path in an easy way. But Holger, you're absolutely right. Design for the worst case. Make sure that you articulate that this is not hindering people from circumventing this, the platform. Like, the contrary should be true. And I actually know the platform at your company. Your colleagues have been kind enough to show that to me, and I think they're doing a fairly good job and really thinking about the right things. Holger. Good. Any more questions to that?
I think there are some more questions, but let's, okay. I don't know. Are you?
Let's just wrap up. I just want to really quickly run you through like one picture of like building a car, and then we can cover a couple more of your questions. So I just wanted to think about this. Like, there's this guy Gregor Hope who does these amazing comparisons, and I'm just always really astonished. So I'm trying to become at least 10% as good as Gregor. And so what I was just observing is that immature organizations tell teams to build a car. They give them a credit card. They tell them where to find a store with raw materials. And when they struggle, they then send people to help them organize, and then they call this DevOps, right? So this is the shadow operations bit right here. Then we go a step further. a little more mature organizations, they tell teams to build a car, they give them a credit card, and they tell them where to find the raw materials. And if the teams struggle, DevOps helps them to organize themselves, and cloud operations teams helps them to find the right materials and then prep those for them. Okay, and so now if we stick in the analogy, advanced organizations tell teams to build a car, the platform team prepares a platform, and then developers build on top. And I want to give an even more specific example. I think one of the core evils of our industry, and that is a little, maybe not everybody agrees, but is unstructured configuration files. I like, this is my number one enemy. Like these things that are nasty and everywhere and bash scripts, and you take over from your colleague who just left and you have to understand them, and it's a huge drama. And if I think about this, like that we have unstructured configuration files, which I think is one of these things is really nasty. And I think one of the first things that one should standardize. It's a little bit like your Tesla. Okay, I'm German, I can't talk about Tesla. I'm VW, and I'm an engineer, and I want to screw two parts together. And every time I'm screwing two parts together, I'm reinventing a screw. You would never do that because it would mean huge amount of maintenance overhead. There is no way to know how these screws behave if you crash into something. It's just a really, really bad idea, but we're doing it all of the time. And there are a lot of things that we have to standardize. And again, standardization does not mean keeping people away from understanding what's under the hood. Yeah, that is my little talk. We are going to share the white paper. And I wrote an extensive article on the dark side of developer self-service. Yeah, if there are questions, I'm very, very happy to go into more details.
Kaspar, thank you so much. That was really, really interesting. We do have a few more questions. And let me start with the one from the chat. So Stephen is asking, how developers have an extra dev stage in the cloud where they are allowed to create all resources manually? If there's a feature that should be used permanently, it is added to the TF code and rolled out to all other stages. The dev stage is torn down at definite intervals and relaunched with the latest Terraform code. So what's your view on that approach?
That sounds pretty clever. I want to remind you of the example that I gave previously. I'm a big fan of Terraform. I think the world should be terraformed. You can't, Terraform isn't the answer to everything. There are a lot of things, and I'm a big fan of thinking about it holistically. And holistically means, I gave this Cloud SQL example. Terraform can very well spin up the Cloud SQL instance. But there's more to it. You have to have the sidecar proxy, you have to deal with the configs, you have to inject stuff. It has to be done over and over again. You have to deal with secrets, all of that. But you don't have to do everything at once. And starting with an infrastructure service catalog, where you basically build Lego blocks that are pre-vetted by security and that give certain guarantees. And you build an easy CLI on top. And this CLI basically calls something and then executes Terraform. And this can be, I mean, there are dozens of tools. There's Terraform Cloud is awesome. And like you can do lots of these things. This is only a small step, but it's already a really powerful one. And then once this is done, you can take the next step and you can think about configuration management. Can you maybe create the configurations context dependent against baseline YAML files? That's a resource. That's an approach that I talk about a lot, because I think there's one of this don't reinvent the screw answers. You can then put RBAC on top, and then once you have that, and maybe you've even API'd this against, I like to talk about platform APIs that then dynamically can compose these things for you. Then you can put lots of automations on top. So think of this as products. There is a clear user, there is a clear persona, there is a clear user persona, that's your developer. You have to measure, you have to ask, you have to communicate. But what you're describing is a great first step into this direction.
Okay, cool. A few more questions from the Q&A section. There's one question about the AEM stack, the Adobe Experience Manager stack. I'm not sure how familiar you are with that stack and how to monitor it.
Unfortunately, not very experienced with the AEM stack, and I don't want to talk about things that I don't fully understand.
Cool. Willem is asking, does you build it, you run it also include giving developers direct access to production data?
That's difficult. I think we're living in a world where this might be still possible in some of the organizations. This will be much more penalized in the future. You can already see the more sensitive teams like addressing this. I think we'll see much more of this being shut down in the future. I don't think that this is directly interconnected. I think where we have to do a much better job as an industry, and there is a tool that I'm a big fan of, but I forgot the name, that is doing synthetic test data. I'll look it up, but I would much rather recommend you look at something like this.
Okay. Then Igor is asking, does standardization depend on company size or maturity?
On company size or maturity? No, I don't think so. You can start standardizing right now, and every little step of making 1 out of 2 is a step in the right direction. I've seen very small teams struggle with too much because complexity is a function of the total amount of people involved against the total amount of people that can actually try to deal with the amount of stuff that you have to deal with. So operation equivalence or platform equivalence against developer equivalence. And it's about the ratio, it's not about the size. Although, obviously, if you're a 40-year-old company and you have 6,000 developers, your problem is much larger.
Okay, understood. Amir is asking, how often do environments change? Let's say for a given team that has an existing pipeline that's working.
Good question. I have very precise data on this, and we're going to share this very soon. So what we actually did is that we asked I don't know how many teams, a lot of teams. If you take 100 deployments, how often do you change certain things? Configs, for instance. How often do you need a new environment? How often do you roll back? I remember the config change. Every 20 deployments, does a team on average change things on the configurations?
Cool. Great. Yeah, looking forward to these data sets. Nice. Then Brian is asking, how do lower performing teams actually make the journey successfully to higher performing? Who needs to be bought in? Share some examples of where it went well and where it went poorly, if you can.
Yeah, I can't name names, but I can share some examples. So it's again on this fallacy article that I'm writing. It's really interesting. So I think one of the things, like all of the things that I said, like don't abstract too much, all of that, don't do too much at once. Most of these activities fail because teams are super ambitious and they've done a first prototype and the UI looks amazing and the management says, oh yeah, we're going all in on this. And then they try to do everything at once, and they just buff and say like this huge transformational change in all of the teams at once, and that almost always fails. Failing organizations do all at once, and they roll it out all at once. Good teams build the future inside of lighthouse teams. They identify, and you can do that exercise right now. It almost always works the same. Think of one of your teams that is, and now I'm a little bit prejudiced, like a lot of prejudice here, but that has a high degree of containerization, and that is on managed Kubernetes. That's a little mean, but that's, you know, in 90% of the case, that's the actual benchmarking. Now take this team. In teams that don't do well, they roll all of this standard out to everybody, and you will find that this is not great, because then you have this latest technology, but it's still a horrible developer experience. Rather than doing that, take this specific team and now develop together with these engineers a really nice self-service experience. Spend way too much time on this. Spend a year, it doesn't matter, but really, really get this right. All right, once you're done with that, so why is that a good idea? Because it's still like a fraction of the cost of really getting this team up to speed and fully bought in than rolling out to everybody else. That's always the case, like hiring the wrong person. It's 10 times better to spend 10 times more time testing stuff before it goes into production, testing people before you hire them. And it's the same thing for these change things. And then once you have this team, the lighthouse team, and they're completely fired up, those developers say, this is the greatest experience. And it's like, if you've ever had the chance to talk to a Google engineer, whether they like their internal platform, I encourage you to do that, because all of them say, this is the greatest thing that happened to me, and I've never had such a great experience before. That is the exact situation you want to get in. They also have to understand, why are we doing this? Why are we having abstractions? Why is this a good idea? Then take this team and create an internal pull factor. Let them talk about this over and over again and let them evangelize. And then all of the other teams want to come. You already have the perfect blueprint, and then actually migrate them one-on-one into this new standard. In almost all good change management processes inside of organizations, that is the pattern that I have observed.
Cool. There's many more questions. I'm not sure about your time. And whether we'll be able to get through all of them.
Let's ask
I think we cover for another 8 minutes, and then we have a full hour, so probably have to postpone this then. Igor is asking, why do you use the term DevOps? Would platform benchmarking or DevX benchmarking more accurately describe what you are researching?
Yes, Igor, I think you're absolutely right. That said, the platform trend is one that is accelerating. That is accelerating fast. I'm certain that in 5 years we'll all be talking about nothing else, or like we'll see. I mean, we'll be talking about this a lot, but it's still a niche. And if we would say platform report, nobody would actually click on it. That is pure clickbait, if you want. But it brought us here, and we're having this wonderful conversation.
Okay, very honest. I like that. Fatih is asking, can you elaborate more about platform team characteristics? You don't use any DevOps word here. Where should they fit?
Yeah, I really want to keep this apart from the. I want to keep these functions apart. DevOps, most of the early people have that coined this are reacting very allergic if you say I'm a DevOps engineer, because DevOps is supposed to be a culture, and it's supposed to be a way of life, if you want. There are DevOps teams. I think DevOps teams should be about enabling people. I'm a fan of a certain trinity, and just because I find it overwhelming, I'll leave SRE out for now. DevOps teams for me are about cultural change, about enabling people. And you can see my son is already very tired because it was a long birthday. Then second, you have operations teams. Operations or infrastructure teams are about responding to stuff, are about setting up networking, are about making sure that the VPC is the way the security team wants it. Then there's obviously the security team. The job of the platform team is to build these golden paths. And it's composed by several engineers. They have touch points with the infrastructure team. They have touch points with the cultural setup. They often evolve from these teams. I always encourage teams to nominate technical platform product managers, if you want, that act as real product managers and that are building this for the user of the developer. But it is a distinctive role.
Okay, understood. Cool. Next question. Wim is asking, how do organizations manage DevOps between teams which have dependencies, resulting in breaking changes between each other?
Yeah, so in this particular case, I'm looking at this by treating dependencies that my specific application has as, like, let's say you have a team that works on a central auth service, and this auth service is consumed by several different teams. Now that obviously has a breaking dependency. I'm designing these approaches the same way I would design a relationship to a database, which means 100% making sure that there is a clear like compatibility, backwards compatibility in the APIs, making sure that there is a clear change log and notification system between those teams established, making sure it is clear what the relationship is. That's very often not the case. Making sure you have a good mapping between those, making sure you have strictly parameterized environment variables to react to changes here without actually affecting the team, and designing the architecture as loosely coupled as possible.
Cool, understood. Roberto is asking, you talked about modern versus advanced organizations. Shouldn't the advanced organization developers provide themselves the platform on top of which to build their products instead of having platform team as opposed to developer teams?
I mean, we're getting into a little bit of semantics here. I don't know about, like, that differs from team to team. That's what I meant by cognitive load. If you have a team where you're not under insane pressure of delivering resources, and you can just spend a lot of time learning Terraform and designing all of that yourself, then definitely do that. I'm just observing that in most teams, we are doing division of labor in order to derive effects of scale. And Aaron Eriksson designed the platform at Salesforce, and he said, and that really resonated with me, do you really, if you have 1,000 developers, do you really need 1,000 Kubernetes networking experts? The truth is probably not. And the truth is that it's probably not suitable. And that's what I mean. You have to take those people that are interested, take them along on the journey, let them further develop the product, let them work. But I would encourage you to look at a dedicated function. But again, there is no generalization here. There are teams that do it from within, that there are teams in dedicated teams. I'm observing that from a certain size, on 50 developers, maybe onwards, you probably want to have 2-3 people focusing on this.
Yeah. Cool. Kaspar, there are more questions, but I'm hearing your son, so I think it's it's time for a break here. Thank you so much, Kaspar, for guiding us through this. Thank you, everybody, for attending. I think the best recommendation I have to get your questions answered is probably to jump on our Slack community, which I think you mentioned in the beginning, Kaspar, where we bring together all platform engineers. I'm pretty sure that for most of the questions that you asked tonight, you'll find answers there. If it's specific questions for Kaspar, I'll share the link to your profile in the email tomorrow, if that's okay for you, Kaspar, and then you can follow up directly with you.
I mean, thank you so much. This was a tremendous amount of questions, great questions, super informed audience. So many of you joining. That is just very much appreciated. I encourage you to reach out to me and actually ask specific things if you're stuck somewhere. Not enough people are actually making use of that. I might not get back within a day, but I will get back. I'm striving for inbox 0. And there are many interesting things coming up. We have the platform Slack, which I'm incredibly excited about. I think it has grown by 1,000 members. I think it grew in December. I don't know the current statistics there. We have things like there's Platform Con coming up, a whole conference around platforming. So I'd love to see you there. I'd love you to contribute to these webinars, share war stories, share ideas. Like, these communities are only as good as what we're all contributing to it. And so thank you very much for being here with us tonight. And I hope to see all of you very soon, maybe in person sometimes for a beer in Berlin.
All right. Have a great day, everybody.
Cheers.